Nebuchadnezzar has a furnace standing by that has already been fired up, just in case there's someone who is disobedient and refuses to bow before his image. And it works out that there are now three that have made the king really, really angry. His close associates have defied him publicly in front of thousands of people, and they've even gone so far as to call him by his first name. That's a major, major no-no. Well, the king orders that these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, be tied up. He orders that furnace to be heated 7 times more than it's usually heated. I've been burning with wood a long time, and I know how you do that. You just simply open the vent door that is below the actual fire. What happens is an extra rush of air comes in, makes the fire extra hot. That hot air goes up into the chimney and creates more of a vacuum inside the chimney, which creates even greater updraft. You got to be careful because you can overfire your wood stove if you want to, but I would anticipate this large furnace of Nebuchadnezzar has had its vent opened at the bottom, and now what was a smoldering fire is now raging really, really rapidly as it prepares to receive the three guys who don't want to bow and worship. These guys in chapter 3, Daniel chapter 3, verse 21, are tied up with all of their clothes on, and they are thrown into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. I'm going to read verse 22 for this reason: because the king's command was urgent and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, these servants of Nebuchadnezzar, they recognize that the king is furious and mad, so they don't want to disappoint or disobey the king in any way, or they'll get an appointment for themselves inside the fire. So these guys that have opened the vent door to let more air in forget to close the vent door. And as they open the actual fuel door where you put the wood in to get ready to throw in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the fire, which is raging, now sees an escape route, that it can make its way out those doors without having to wait to go up the chimney. The compression inside the combustion chamber, if you would, sees the path of least resistance, and it sees a way out. And this is why, as they open the door to throw in these guys who are tied up, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fire jumps out of the door, and it slays the Chaldeans who happen to be carrying Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They've been brought close to the door. Those who were carrying them are no more. They lose their balance, they're tied up, and they fall into the furnace of blazing fire. At least that's what I'm theorizing would likely have happened there. They probably forgot in a panic to close the vent door below the actual fuel doors. This is why fire jumped out. Well, it would be interesting at this point to see what happens, because Nebuchadnezzar is astounded. He's outside, in verse 23 and 24, and he's working his calculator. He's got, we got 3 Hebrew guys, and they're carried, by 6 Babylonian guys, assuming 2 guys going to carry 1. So we got a total of 9 guys. We've seen 6 get fried. That means 3 fell in. Why do I now see 4? Be interesting watching Nebuchadnezzar with his calculator try to figure that out. Nebuchadnezzar in verse 26 came near the door. He said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. You know what's interesting? As these guys fell into the furnace, do you notice the only thing that they lose is their bonds? because these guys are seen by Nebuchadnezzar loosed and walking about in the middle of the fire. That would be an interesting sermon, wouldn't it? When you pass through the fire, you lose that by which you were bound. These guys were walking around. And there was a fourth in there. Well, I also noticed Nebuchadnezzar's, how he refers to this Hebrew God. He calls them servants of the Most High God. That's my favorite title for God in all of the Bible. This is a polytheist, one who believes in many gods. And he's not really affirming the Hebrew God is the only God, but he says, man, your God is the Most High of all of them. That's my favorite title of God. This is a polytheist on his way towards the Hebrew God. In verse 27, all of the leaders gathered around, and they found that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was their hair of their heads singed, their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come on them. Nebuchadnezzar in verse 28 said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel, violating the king's command, and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own." You know, over the past 22 years or so, at least of Chaldean history, I see Nebuchadnezzar going through a change. In Daniel chapter 1, there's no great phenomenal miracle happened there, but he does recognize there's something really, really special about Daniel and his friends. In Daniel chapter 2, only Daniel is capable of revealing both the contents and the meaning of a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. So in Daniel chapter 2, he says, "Surely your God is a God of God and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries." And now he calls the Hebrew God the Most High. And he says, if you do not worship this God, you will be dismembered and your house will be made a rubbish heap. And what I notice here is that the greater the heat that is poured out on the Hebrews, the greater Nebuchadnezzar's confession is of the Hebrew God. Now, this raises the question, where's Daniel? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are there. They stand. Where was Daniel? Well, we don't know. We do know that Daniel was busy working in the palace itself. He worked in a different location than Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were over the administration of the province of Babylon. They'd be further away from the castle. Daniel, with his super high position, may have been out on diplomatic duty somewhere. The scripture doesn't say. But it raises the question, if Daniel were there, would he have laid down his life for his faith? Or would he have bowed? Well, we don't know. You have to wait until the 6th chapter of the book of Daniel. And there we find out whether or not Daniel would be willing to lay down his faith or not. But these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because they stood for the desire and the will of God back in Daniel chapter 1, they're exalted. And now they are exalted to a very, very, very high position where Nebuchadnezzar said, let me see, I think he now causes them to prosper in the province of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar actually lauded these guys because they violated the king's command. Nebuchadnezzar, over these 20 years, is on his way towards the Hebrew God. And in the next chapter, God does something spectacular. He calls this most wicked of men to be a believer in the Hebrew God. God does awesome stuff, doesn't he? See you soon.